curse. Ever since I met that strange passenger on the flight years ago, eerie things have been happening in my life. I am a flight attendant. A few years back, on a flight from Southeast Asia back home, I encountered an unusual passenger. The plane was about to take off, but the man refused to part with his large piece of luggage. I reminded him to store it in the overhead compartment, as keeping it on his lap was dangerous. However, he became furious and stubbornly refused. He insisted that the luggage must stay with him, that it couldn't be placed anywhere else or mixed with other people's belongings. No matter how much I tried to persuade him, he wouldn't listen. With no other choice, I asked a more experienced colleague for help. After some effort, we finally convinced him. But it was clear he wasn't happy. Once the plane was in stable flight, I pushed the service cart down the aisle. As I passed by his seat, the man suddenly handed me a small wooden box and asked me to throw it away. The box was rectangular, about the size of my palm. Strange symbols were carved on the lid, like an ancient script. I hesitated, unsure if I should take it. But the man was difficult, and I didn't want more trouble. Ignoring my unease, I reached out and took the box. The moment my fingertips touched it, a sharp electric shock surged through my entire body, like a bolt of lightning. But it lasted only a second, so I didn't think much of it. I carried on with my duties, but halfway through the flight, I started feeling dizzy. My head pounded, my limbs felt weak. I thought it was just exhaustion from lack of sleep, and pushed through until landing. But soon, I couldn't bear it anymore. I collapsed. My colleague found me lying on the floor and quickly brought me to the crew's rest area. She told me to take a break and left. I lay on the bed and dozed off. In my sleep, I felt an odd tingling sensation on my legs, like countless tiny hairs brushing against my skin. At first, I thought it was just the blanket. But then, the tingling turned into sharp, needle-like stings. Waves of pain prickled my skin. I was too exhausted to care. Overwhelmed by sleepiness, I simply turned over and continued sleeping. After a few hours of rest, I felt much better. My head cleared and my body felt lighter. I got up to put on my heels and return to work. But as I slipped my foot into my shoe, I instantly yanked it back. Something inside was brushing against my toes. I didn't know what it was, and I was too afraid to reach in and check. Instead, I shook the shoe hard and even banged it against the table. Then, thump! Something heavy fell to the floor. It had a deep red shell, as if covered in dried blood. Dark spots dotted its back. Its white, triangular wings were as large as an adult's hand. I was so terrified that I dropped my shoe and bolted out of the room. Just then, from the creature's rear, 4 hairy tentacle-like limbs started stretching out, growing longer and longer. I had never seen anything like it. It looked like a horrific mix between a moth and a centipede. Panicked, I ran straight to the passenger cabin. My colleagues and the passengers saw my terrified expression. I frantically explained what had happened. A male colleague immediately ran to check the rest area. Meanwhile, I sat frozen, my hair disheveled, still barefoot, still shaking. In my dazed state, my eyes instinctively found the strange passenger, and what I saw sent shivers down my spine. He was staring directly at me. His eyes were sharp, his face tense. His lips moved continuously as if he were whispering an incantation. 10 minutes later, my colleague returned. He said he had checked every corner of the room. There was nothing there, no sign of any strange creature, no evidence of what I had seen. He reassured me, saying I was probably just exhausted and had a bad dream. His words calmed me down for a while. But as I fastened my seatbelt for landing, my female colleague suddenly pointed at my leg. "Hey, did you hit something?" she asked. I frowned. "What do you mean? There are some weird bruises on your knee." I looked down. Sure enough, dark, thin marks streaked across the inside of my left knee. I touched them. There was no pain. My skin was smooth, unbroken. My stockings were intact. It was odd, but I shrugged it off. "Maybe I bumped into something," I muttered. Later at home, I was about to take a shower when I got a closer look at my leg. That's when I realized they weren't bruises at all. They were strange symbols, forming an irregular pattern, just like the carvings on that wooden box. I suddenly remembered the sharp pains I felt in my sleep. The exact spot where I had felt those stings was where the markings were now. Panic surged through me. I rushed into the bathroom and scrubbed at my skin. But no matter how hard I tried, the dark marks wouldn't fade. And from that moment on, The moths began appearing. At first, they gathered outside my window, clustering on the walls. Then they started creeping inside, into my bedroom. One night, I woke up to find my body covered in them, moths crawling all over me. That sight was pure horror. The fear consumed me. I lived in constant dread. To this day, those marks remain on my body. When people ask about the strange scars, I tell them the story of that cursed flight. I once sought help from a friend who studied medicine. He said the markings might be an unusual form of varicose veins. But I don't believe that. If it were just a medical condition, why did it appear right after I touched that box? And what about the moths? The monstrous creature I saw? Too many things have happened. This is no coincidence. I can't shake the feeling that the man on that flight cursed me with some ancient forbidden spell.